Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, and assembled company, welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe. And it's Monday night, and we are connecting the world by story. And I had this fantastic night planned, and it will be a fantastic night or day, depending on which part of the world you're sitting in. But I had Paul Jackson, Gail Ross, and I'm hoping Gail will join us at some point. She's not here yet, but there is time. And Sola story, and I can't see Sola yet, but I'm sure he will join us. Giorgiana from Romania, but Giorgiana is definitely not joining us on account of the fact she's got COVID, poor girl, and she's on her second week, but she found it very difficult to get out of bed today. Who we do have with us is the amazing, the phenomenal, the fantastic Paul Jackson, who is chair of the Society of Storytellers.
Hence the bird.
Yes, the bird, that's their symbol.
The
That's what?
It's a phoenix.
It's a I know it's a phoenix. It just raises. It's like storytelling. It raises from the ashes every few years. You know, every time anyone thinks it's all dead, it's all finished, we refuse to have anything to do with that and rise again. We might drop on if other people don't turn up, and it's not like she's second best. She is, in fact, one of our stars, but she hasn't been with us for a while because, like Paul, she's a visual artist. And so we might, all the way from Finland, she's hung her exhibition. It's all finished.
Ooh.
She planned to come to us this evening for pure relaxation.
But what happened?
But I might blow that for her. But anyway, let us see. I know I'm going to message Gail in a minute, but for now,
you're right, John.
I was just a cake crumb on the back of the throat. It's better than it looks visually better on the back of the throat. Who's that? Ali, you are making noises. Mute.
As the storyteller, you should know better than eat a piece of cake before storytelling.
I know, but it was a really nice piece of walnut cake and I couldn't resist it. But right for now, less of all this faffing around. Can you please put your hands together and welcome Mr. Paul Jackson? Paul, stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Well, I'm very lucky that just a few miles away from here, there is an amazing beach, which I think probably Shane knows about, which is Horsey Gap. And at this time of the year, the last 2 or 3 months, it is absolutely full of seals. The most extraordinary seals. And if you've ever got close to a seal without, risking disturbing them, there is no doubt about the fact of why stories, the Selkie stories, came about. And because it's World Storytelling Cafe, and because the people who live in the sea underneath the waves live all the way around the world, I thought I would tell you a story that you could find anywhere in the world. And as I was walking along the cliff one day at Horsey Gap, I saw a young girl, and she picked up a shell, and it reminded me of this story that I want to tell you. And I remember as a child putting a shell to my ear and listening because I was told the whole world was in it. And when I was watching the girl, it reminded me of something Duncan told me, and it was this story. So go back to a time where there was a man on his own. It's past midnight. He's come home from fishing, as he does 6 days a week. He's washed out his shirt, thick with salt. He's had his meal alone. And now he's sitting there. A clock is ticking. A book is dropping off his lap as he starts to fall asleep. But then he hears something strange, something he had never heard of before. And he goes to his door and he unlocks the door and he looks outside and he looks down the street, a narrow street with a church at the end. And coming down that street, echoing, is the sound of voices singing. Oh, he says, so what's that at this time of night? And curious, he puts on his boots and he puts on a coat and he enters that street, that echoing street, and passes the houses, those empty houses, their curtains shut, the people asleep. He goes down to the church and past the church where all the dead souls are nice and silent. And he comes down to the beach. And all the while he hears the sound of voices singing. Above him, as there was a few nights ago here, a full moon shining. And he looks out across the sea, the waves crashing across the beach. And he remembers something that his father once told him. You know, grandson, who lives out in the sea, in the deep, deep sea, are the seal people. And when the fisherman had asked his grandfather what he meant, how can people live out in the sea? Grandson, one day you might see them. If you're lucky enough, beneath the full moon. Sometimes they come out in the spring, come on the beach and sing. They'll take off their skins. Of course, he never believed them. Never believed his grandfather. He'd never seen it himself. And yet now he could hear something. So he makes his way along the strand, up the cliff, following the sound, until he gets to the very edge and he looks down and a small bay, sandy and shingled, and there in the moonlight, people dancing, people singing, pale skin as white as the moon, black hair as black as the sky, 15, maybe 16 of them dancing and dancing. Of course, curious by now, he makes his way down through the rocks to a little cove next to the bay and watches them and then sees there, close by, a pile of skins, the empty eyes, the skulls, seal skins. Then surely these are the Selkie people. And as he watches them and the waves coming in and out, another comes and takes off their skin. A man, a woman, young and old. And then a grey seal comes in. Small it is. And as the others makes its way, ruffles its way up the beach, pulls off its skin. And as she does, the longest black hair you ever did see. And at once this fisherman who'd never had a wife and never had a love inside of him fell in love with this woman, this beautiful woman, as she stepped out from her skin and went and danced and sang with the others. And he watched, enamored. And then this idea came to him. What if I took her skin? If I took her skin, she could not go back. And if she could not go back to the sea, why, she could stay with me and be my wife and give me children. So the fisherman steps out, reaches out to those skins, to that seal skin, that grey skin, and takes hold of it and goes into the shadows and hides that skin and waits, and the moon sinks across the sea. And he watches those people run down the beach, pull on their skins until seals once more. And they make their awkward way down the beach into the waves, and at once, they're gone, one after another, until the only one left is the one he had fallen in love with. And there she is upon the beach, looking around and seeing the seals out to sea. Brother, sister, mother, father, give me back my skin. Let me have my skin back. And they looked at her and called to her, and then vanished beneath the waves. And it was only then that the fisherman came out, and she saw him by the last of the moonlight, and stared at this mortal man. "Do you have my skin? Did you take my skin?" "No," he said. "I was watching you dancing, all of you. I think I saw it amongst the waves. I think it got washed away. But what am I to do? I can't go back to the sea and I can't stay here. I need my skin." "I tell you what," he said. "You can come with me. I live in the village. I can't go there. You're a mortal man. I belong in the sea. You can come with me tonight. Tomorrow I'll come and find your skin. Come with me." And the fisherman steps out across that beach and takes her and picks her up. She is so light, so pale, and carries her up the beach, and she rests her head on his shoulder along the strand, past the church, past the houses with their curtains shut, into his house, and sits her down in a chair and covers her with a blanket. And there he does some magic. He lights a fire. She'd never seen a fire. "What is this?" "This is the fire of the earth. You know of the moon and the sea. This is the fire where I belong. And tomorrow, will you find my skin?" "I will do my best," he said. And she sat there looking at the flames until eventually she fell asleep. And the fisherman crept out and went down through that street, down to that cliff, down to where he'd hidden the skin, and took it along the beach, there to this fisherman's hut, and went inside and locked it away where no one would find it, and went back to his house. And the next morning he fed her, and she said, "Go and find my skin. I have to go home." And he went down to the beach, and when he came back empty-handed. There is no skin, not yet. Another tide and another tide. Well, what am I to do? "You can stay here." "But I'm not like you. I don't look like you. I have no clothes to..." "My mother's mother. She will know how to fit you in so that no one knows that you've come from the sea, that you're a woman of the sea." So she goes to see his mother's mother, and he was right. She gave him a comb and hairpins and clothes to wear. And then she said, "Now, if you're to stay with my grandson, I'll teach you how to cook, to make bread, to cook cod and herrings and skate. I will teach you everything about lobsters and crabs and prawns." And so over the weeks, she taught her how to be a fisherman's wife. And all the while she complained, "But I need to go home." "But young girl, you can't go home. Now you must stay here and be immortal." And so it was that she had to stay. She learnt to sow in the field, to grow vegetables, to cook vegetables. She knew how to do these things. And the people in the streets, the women would watch her go by and say, "Look how pale her skin is, how dark her hair." And one woman said, "You know, I spoke to her in the marketplace. And though she seemed like you and me, when I looked into her eyes, she seemed so sad. And when I asked her what grief she had, she said she had no grief." And they watched her go by, back to her cottage. And the weeks went on and the weeks went on until that woman went along that cliff where that skin had been lost. And she stood there, and as she looked out amongst the waves, she saw so many seals and recognized them. "I want to go home." But she put her hands on her belly, and she knew that she could not go home. For quickening there was a child, but there would be a mortal child that could not live in the sea. And what could she do? But let it all go. Let all those memories go. And so she turned around on the cliff and she went home. And that was home from there on. And she had a child, a little girl. She taught the girl what she had been taught. She one day would be a fisherman's wife. And another year went by, and she had a little son. By now, everything that was in her head that ever was when she was a child was gone. She was a mortal woman. All of the past did not exist anymore and would not have existed except one day. In late summer, her children were playing. She was cooking in the kitchen, singing songs that she had been taught by others in the village, when she said to her children, "Go and welcome your father home. See what catch he has." And the children went down that street and past the church and came on the beach and looked there. And the boy looked at his sister and said, "Let's surprise our father. Let's go and hide in his hut." So they did. But when they got there, it was locked. "Don't worry," said the sister. "I know where father keeps the key." And she went and found the key and opened the door. "Where should we hide?" "Well, I know where I'm going to hide," said the sister. "I'm going to hide behind father's old boat amongst the rigging." So she did. And the boy looked around and saw a great big oil drum. He said, "I'll hide here. That'll be good. I'll jump out at father." And as he hid behind the drum, he felt something at his feet. "Sister, come here." And when the sister came over, "What is it?" "Look there on the floor." And there, underneath the oil drum, there was a door. Together they pushed the drum and opened the door, and there were steps down into some kind of cellar. They lit the lantern. "Let's go and see what father hides down here." And as they went down the stairs, they looked together and saw somebody staring back at them. Hollow eyes, a skin. "Why is there a seal skin down here?" And they scooped it up. And they went up the stairs and they went through the street and they came to the house, and there was mother preparing the supper, waiting for them to come home with the fish for the catch. But as they came in, holding the skin, with the face staring at her, as she turned around, everything that she had forgotten, everything that had gone from her mind suddenly came back. Her head was full of all the images of living in the sea. "My children, what are you doing with this? Where have you found this? This is mine." How can that be yours, mother? It's a seal skin." "It's my skin." And she took hold of it and she stroked it. "Oh, I remember what it was like to swim in the sea." "Where did you find it?" "Come with me." And she led her daughter and son out of the house and down that street and past the church and stood on that beach. "My children, I do not know why your father did what he did, but you must tell him what has happened now. I have to go home." "But mother!" And then they watched her pulling on that skin, pulling it over her body and over her head until she was no more or less than a seal that went awkwardly down the beach until she touched the salty waves, and in she went, and they watched her vanish and stood there together. An hour or two went by until they saw their father's boat coming home, and he could see them standing on the beach. And as he got out of his boat, as he heard the story, he broke down and cried, "But why, father? Why did you steal her skin?" "I have to tell her why. I have to find her." Some people say that it took him months. Some people say it took a year. He never gave up. He needed to tell her why he stole her skin. Some people say that one day there was a seal in this sea that he saw and knew that it was her, and went and got his son and daughter and said, "There is your mother." And with that, some people say that he went into the waves and swam towards her. And the children watched them swimming around as if they were talking to one another. And some people say that not only the seal disappeared, but so did the Father. The sea was empty. But those who live in the Orkneys say, no, the Father came back to the shore, came back and wrapped his arms around his son and daughter, and they wept together, they sorrowed together. And some people say that from that day to this day and forevermore, the people who live in those parts, those islands, perhaps all the way around the world, some of them have the whitest skin and the darkest hair and the saddest eyes, because they are descended of the people who live in the sea. Yeah.
That was a beautiful retelling of a wonderful story, Paul.
Pleasure.
Made me feel I was sitting on a field in Tuttington with you and Hugh and Jenny round a fire with you all telling stories. Now, Sola is joining us in a minute, so we've got a few people from Suffolk here, so I think I'm going to go a bit south from
over the border.
Over the border. So I thought I'd just do a quick telling of which can be stretched for 1,000 years, or it can be squashed into a John Rose style of telling. So it's about 60 seconds. No, it's going to be a bit longer than that. But in the 1850s, in the Ipswich Journal, there was a woman who wrote down the stories she'd been told by her nurse. And they've become famous all over the world. The two best known ones are Caparushes and Tom Tit Tot. So I thought I'd do Caparushes. Sort of follows on quite well from Paul's, I think. And when I finish, maybe Sola will be with us. But and this is from way back in time when my hair was dark and my beard was ginger and all my teeth were my own. And there was a dad, a rich man. I mean, you know, there's a castle sitting behind Joe there, Framlingham Castle. Well, that would have been his country cottage. And he had 3 daughters. And the way dads do, you know, I mean, mums, they know they're wonderful. But, you know, us dads, we need to be told it continuously. And so he turned around to his daughters and he said, daughters, how much do you love me? Now, the oldest daughter, she looked at him, she went, Daddy, dear, I love you more than all the gold and all the silver and all the jewels in the whole world. Now, you know, even Paul, who is a non-materialistic man, would have been pleased with that answer. Shane would have just said, well, go out and get them for me. But he thought that was fantastic. And he turned to his second daughter and he said, daughter dear, how much do you love me? She said, Daddy dear, I love you more than life itself. Fantastic. You know, I mean, which dad would not be? You know, you'd just be walking around with your chest puffed out for the day. But his youngest, and if truth be known, his favourite. He turned round to her and said, how much do you love me? He said, Daddy dear, I love you more than fresh meat loves salt. What? Even the poorest peasant has salt. You don't love me at all. Get out of my house right now. Pop upstairs. Get some clothes out of your dead mother's chest. You know, that's like a chest of drawers and stuff. Or in those days, a box. And get out of my house and never darken my doorstep again. Well, she went upstairs and she took a dress of silver, a dress of gold, and a dress the colour of the birds of the sky. And she wrapped them up in a little bundle and she went walking. And she walked for a long way and further still. Now, if I had time, I would describe the paths through Suffolk And I did once have to cross the Waveney while I was walking. I was walking actually to Tuttington from Ipswich, and I thought, and I had to cross the Waveney. I was dressed as a medieval peddler, and hi Sola, and good to see you. I thought, and there was a bridge one way, about a mile, and then I had to walk back a mile the other side. I thought, well, in those medieval times, they wouldn't have walked that far. So there was this bloke behind the hedge, and he was lighting his fire, and I leant across, all in my medievalism, and I said, "Excuse me, is there a footbridge?" And he said, he didn't even blink. He said, "Yeah." He said, "Go down there a tut, and you go keep on your left." He said, "You'll fall in the marsh, and then you'll get across the river, and you keep an eye on the church, you see, and then you just head towards that." He said, "They changed the footpath," he said, "but you're not to know that, are you?" And he was quite right. I didn't fall in the marsh, and I got there. But that's nothing to do with this story. But that was the sort of places she was walking. Eventually, she walked for a long time, and there was a stream, and on the side of the stream was a fantastic house, a mansion. And by the stream, there was a hollow tree. And she took her best clothes and she put them in the hollow tree, and she waded out and she cut rushes, and she made herself a cape of rushes with a big hood that came over her head. And she went and she knocked on the door of that big house. And the master said, "Yes, my dear." She said, "Have you got a job?" He said, "Well, if you go around the back and tell the servants I sent you, they'll give you a job." And she went round the back, and sure enough, there she was given a job. She was the new girl on, so she got all the grotty jobs, cleaned out the fireplace and doing. But they liked. She never complained, and she never spoke either. They never told them it's her name, so they just called her Cap of Rushes. They liked it. She was cheerful enough, laughing and singing, and she was doing her work. She just didn't talk much. So there was a time the servant said, Cap of Rushes, Cap of Rushes. It's going to be a great dance night. It's going to last 3 nights. And we all go up to the gallery, and, we get a bit of wine and cheese from the cellar and go up there. The master, he knows we take it, but he don't mind much. And we see all those fine lords and ladies coming down every night. Come and join us. Yeah, I'd love to, but I'm far too tired. And she just laid down the bench and pretended to be asleep. As soon as the servants was gone, she's out. She's across the river. She's got a dress of the colour of the birds of the sky. She puts that on. She looks in the reflection in the stream, and she looks good. She goes in. She's shown down into the ballroom. She catches the eye of the master, and they dance a little. And, they're just looking into each other's eyes for the whole night. At the end of the night, she rushes off, puts her big cape on, goes and lies on the bench. Cap of Rushes, you should have seen it. The most fantastic girl you have ever seen in all of your life appeared tonight. The master just couldn't take her eyes off her. We think he's falling in love. Oh, very interesting. I wish I'd seen her. Well, the next night, the same thing happens again. And because Sola's here, I don't want to take too long because I'm holding him up. But we know what happened. Cap of Rushes, come. No, I'm much too tired. I'll just lay here. Lays down, goes across the river. Well, a servant obviously goes out. Goes across the river, puts on a dress of silver, comes up. The master is waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He dances with her all night. Now, that might be historically unsound because we know they did set dancing in those days rather than just this two. But I don't care. I just have the vision of these two smooching all night across the floor. At the end of the night, She made her excuses. She went off. She got her cape. She put that on, lay down the bench. In Kappa rushes. You should have seen she was here again tonight. She looks amazing. And the master was standing at the bottom of the stairs. God, you know, he just didn't dance with anyone else all night. We know he's falling in love. Oh, very interesting, she said. I wish I'd seen it. Well, tomorrow night then, it's your last chance. Well, tomorrow night came, and predictably enough, she was far too tired. And off they went. She goes out, she puts on a dress of gold. This time he's at the top of the stairs. They come down hand in hand. They dance all night. During the night, he takes off his ring. He gives it to her. She takes one of her long hairs, ties it through the ring, ties it round the back, drops it down her front. And then she was gone. And then she was back on the bench, lying down, snoring away. Kappa rushes. You should have seen she was back tonight. He gave her a ring. We know he's falling in love. I wish I'd seen her, she said. So anyway, the master, he sends out his servants, try and find the girl. Can't find her anywhere. Now, men, when they don't get what they want, you know, apparently we get angry, but the truth is we sulk. He sulked. He took himself to bed. You know, he walked around his big house, you know, for a while with his sort of bottom lip dragging along the floor behind him. And then he just took himself to bed, and he refused to eat and he refused to sleep. This went on. He got thinner and thinner and thinner. He got nearly as thin as my stick there. And the servants really worried. He wasn't a bad master, you know. He knew about the bread and cheese and wine and everything, and he didn't care that they were nicking it, as long as they didn't take too much. And they didn't want him to die, and some new geezer come along. So they said this cook starts making a big bowl of soup, and he turns to Kappa rushes. He said, "Would you stir this? And when it's ready, can you put it in a bowl? Don't let it burn." Now, I don't know why people give you soup when you're ill. You know, I mean, what you want is cream cakes and ice cream. But yeah, in it truth, they always give you, oh, it will do you good. Well, he's going to, and so he gets he takes the bowl of soup. One of the other servants take the bowl of soup up, and he's got it. Now, you know, when you're ill and people give you food, you know, you kind of play with it, don't you? You don't actually eat it. You just push it around the plate because you can't handle it. And soup's useless. You push that around, it flops back into the middle. But he's flipping his soup, he's pushing the soup around, and click, click. He takes out this ring. Who made this soup? Bring them to me. Well, in came the cook. Big black beard, big red face, big pot belly. Well, it wasn't you, he said. Someone must have helped you. Well, it's just a little servant girl, Kappa rushes. We like her. We really like her. But, you know, don't be angry at what he came. She comes up and goes in the room. He holds up the ring and sort of as much as anger as he can get in his voice said, "Where did you get this ring from?" He wasn't old, he was just weak. She said, "From him who gave it to me." And with that, she threw off her cloak. And there stood the girl he'd been dancing with all night. Well, obviously, there was going to be a great wedding. You know, we don't even need to go on with the preparations about that. You know, we could talk about for an hour about the preparations, but suffice it to say, she just had one request, that there should be no salt served on the meat. Well, that night, all the guests are there. Everyone waits for the master to cut his meat first. It's polite to do that. He takes his knife, because there were no forks in those days, and he cuts off a piece of meat. Everyone cuts off a piece of meat. Everyone puts the piece of meat on the end of their knives, and everyone puts the meat in their mouth at the same. Everyone spat out on the floor. But at the end of the long table, there was a man crying. And they asked him what it was. What was wrong? He said, well, years ago, I don't know whether it was years or a year, it was a while, I asked my daughters how much they loved me, and the oldest one said she loved me more than all the gold and all the silver and all the jewels and all the world. I thought that was amazing. And the second daughter said she loved me more than life itself. I thought that was even better. But the youngest one said, I love you more than fresh meat loves salt. And I thought she didn't love me at all. And I drove her from my doorstep. And I have no means of knowing whether she is alive or dead. And with that, Kappa rushes through her bridal veil off her face. And there stood his daughter. And she went up and she threw her arms around her father. And there was a great family reunion. And there was fresh meat served, this time with salt. And there was masses to eat and masses to drink. And it was such a wedding. And had you been there, each and every one of you would have been invited. Wipe end, story ends. Well, that was a bit longer than 10 minutes. That was sorry about that, folks. But in that time, while I've been gabbering or blubbering or whatever I was doing, we were joined by the amazing Sola story, who. So we've just, I'm expecting Gail, but she might not have known the clocks have changed. I don't know. I have messaged her, but right now, could you please, he's rushed across. He was on the moon earlier. Now, this is true. He was on the moon earlier and he came down via the virtual highway. Ali was guiding him and he got there and he's just scraped in. So please, have you got your breath back, Sola? Yeah, you're all right. Okay. Yeah, right. So please, ladies and gentlemen, could you please put your hand together for Sola's story?
Thank you very much, John, and thank you everyone for the warm welcome. Yeah, it's there's not much air on that moon, you know, and it's quite a tricky thing getting here, but here I am, and I'm glad to be here too. Thank you for that story, Colin. Sorry, John. That's definitely not how I thought it was going to end. I thought it was going to end in the traditional Cinderella type of wedding, etc. So I really appreciated that little twist. Yeah. So my name is Sola Story, and I am a storyteller, as the name might indicate. And I'm coming here today to tell you a story that I actually wrote. And it's the story I'm going to, rather than perform, I would normally perform a story, and there will be some elements of that. But if you will bear with me, I'd like to read you a story, because it's from this book, Nyinka's Daughter, which I actually wrote. And when I was going to tell it straight without reading, but I actually like the words that I've written. So if you'll allow me, if you'll indulge me, I'll read from the book. So before I do, I just wanted to preface the story with this. My stories tend to be either African stories or be heavily influenced by stories from Africa. And I've adopted a mode of storytelling that is generically African. Naturally, in Africa, in any country in Africa, there's many different peoples, and they all have different customs and different ways of doing things. But one of the things that is kind of universal throughout the continent of Africa and in the diaspora, the Caribbean, African America, in South America, etc., is that storytelling is participatory as opposed to having an audience and a storyteller, which is less communicable on Zoom than it is in person, but we can nevertheless still do something. So I'm going to say, in a place far from here, but near to there. And when I say in a place far from here, I would like you to say, but near to there. Naturally, because it's Zoom, you'll have to do it in mute so that there's no cacophony. But nevertheless, I'll be able to see you and feel that you're with me anyway. So let's begin. In a place far from here, but near to there. I said, in a place far from here, but near to there. I said, in a place far from here, but near to there. Nainka was a queen in a land of queens, a land of joy called Kalo, where the booming song of the surf was carried throughout the thriving villages and towns by the land breath, the fresh wind that carried seeds and life-giving rain, cooling the fierce blaze of the bright day star. It was a place to be happy in, a place of laughter and plenty. In the third season of her coming of age moon cycle, Nainka, as was customary for the queens of Kalo, was initiated into queenship and thus given the talisman of a beautifully crafted silver snake with eyes made from flawless diamonds. Suna, the high priestess, chanted the earth song, and all the priestesses, including the new queen Nainka, danced Nyoka, the initiatory snake dance that was said to bring harmony and connection to all things in the world. And she danced the snake dance. And I would like to see you dance the snake dance along with me. So she danced the snake dance, very snaky Manuela Kelly. And Colin Irwin, I can see the snake in you. Norman, that's a very double-headed snake even. I can see the snake writ large in all of you, and I give thanks. So, as long as so it had always been, and as Suna said, as long as the queens of Kalo dance the Nyoka, so it would always be. All was well in the land, and because the young queen was initiated into the mysteries, she learned to serve her land as both a daughter and a mother. The reign of Nainka was a blessed one among the people. The old ones said that such a prosperous time had not been witnessed since before the Kaloni left the Golden Land during the invasion of the Desert Kings. So Kalo became a center of trade and learning, and ships from the known and unknown lands docked in its deep harbor, eager to make a fortune. And it was during the emerald year of Nainka that her daughter received the silver snake in her turn. That was also the year that everything changed. And that's why the story of those times has come to be known as the story of Nainka's daughter. Her name was Ashe. Ashe was a powerful young woman. Her mother, Nainka, and her grandmothers had been queens of Kalo for generations. She was groomed from the day of her birth to be next in line. She loved her family and her land, but she loved more to run on the warm sands of the long beach, feeling the spray in her face as the land breath balanced the heat of the day. Most of all, though, she loved to fight, wrestling with her sisters and honing the techniques of the Nyoka fighting dance. She and her sisters were girls of the Cobra clan. They were all warriors, and Ashe was the most skilled amongst them. On the year that she in her turn received the silver snake, the people of Kalo began to suffer a strange affliction. It began small with one person, then another in different families. Slowly it spread in small increments, taking over whole villages unnoticed by most, so that by the time it came to official notice, it was already an epidemic, which is kind of topical for now, I suppose. The plague of Buruku, it was called. This was not a physical pestilence with boils and pus. Rather, this was a disease of the spirits, an erosion of people's ability to see, and a diminishing of their capacity to be silent and contemplative. A new impulse grew towards filling every moment with bright, irrelevant chatter and trivial commentary, accompanied by a lack of compassion. A sundering of heart connection that led to those afflicted beginning to desire the external trappings of fame, status, and material power more than the gifts of the spirits. A new thing in Kalo. Chief amongst those so affected was Ponno, sorceress of the Three Ridges, which was a rocky cataract above Kalo. Ponno was sister of Suna, the royal priestess, and her affliction took the form of envy and jealousy. The new chattering voice that she inherited with the Buruku could not understand why she, with all her mighty accomplishments of power, should not be high priestess rather than her milksop of a sister, Suna. Recently, she had been receiving delegations of strange men, Northmen they called themselves. Buruku was a way of life for them, although they called it high-sounding names like civilization, economics, and philosophy. The Northmen whispered thoughts of ambition in Ponno's ear, and her own spirit of Buruku was exultant with thoughts of her impending takeover. Without further ado, she began to spread this idea amongst the new caste of people, a type of person unknown amongst the people who had always valued inspiration and inner guidance highly, a type of person who, despite their own misgivings, was willing to subvert their heart's truth and mind's will to that of another for material gain. Soon the disease of Buruku dominated the province of the Three Ridges. Ponno, with the help of the Northmen, began to create a secret army. This was no ordinary army, but an army changed and malformed by dark sorcery. Ponno's soldiers began to avoid the sun and inhabit caves, emerging only at night to run nefarious errands for the hateful woman. And as they labored under her magic, so she and they became more and more twisted until they little resembled the graceful Kalonis they had once been. Ashe was wrestling on the beach near the point where the three rivers met the ocean in a foaming battle of colliding waters. The laughter of her companions was almost lost in the continuous roar of this collision. A constant spray hung in the air like a curtain of cooling mist. And as far as Ashe was concerned, this was the best place in Kalo to do strenuous exercise. It was so refreshing. Suddenly, Bara, her clan sister, stopped fighting back and cried, "Halt!" Everyone froze in surprise and looked where she pointed and saw figures racing towards them. This was not unusual. What was unusual was the disheveled state they were in, the horror in their eyes, the ungainly gaits, and worse still, the high-pitched screams of despair that emitted from throats unused to such discordant sounds. Ashe bellowed at the runners, "Control yourselves! What manner of behavior is this? Why do you act so?" The sound of authority enabled the runners to get a grip of themselves. Adba Ashe, they said, using Ashe's title. Adba Naika, along with Iyasono and all their clans have been killed. Dread twisted beings, led by the terrible sorcerer Pono, fell upon them and destroyed them all. We few were able to escape and warn you. Their voices distorted and changed as one rasped in an increasingly threatening growl. Beware, Abase, for even now they come for you, and even you cannot prevail against their might. He roared the last, and Ashe was so stunned by this terrible news and his manner of delivery that her life might have ended right then, if not for Bara, her clan sister, who moved with a lightning grace and drawing her sword with a powerful flowing slash, removed the head of the newsbringer, ending him as his companions began to slaver, jaws lengthening and limbs twisting while they changed into ravening hyenas and launched themselves at Ashe and her companions. Wicked, fast and monstrously strong though they were no match for the warriors of the Cobra clan, who cut them down with an incomparable battle grace and a dreadful but controlled wrath. Ashe spoke with a fiery anguish to her sisters in her clan. We must return to the Grovelands, where my mother and her gentlefolk hold or held counsel. If these dogs were telling the truth, and our people have all been killed, we must avenge them. Most importantly, we must clear our land of this evil blight. Bellowing, chanting, and clashing spears on shields, they swore in the name of their clan and Kalo that they would not rest until they were dead or the deed was done, whichever came first. Approaching the Grovelands, Ashe and her cobras saw an unnatural darkness hanging over the localized area of the sacred trees. Sorcery, they shouted. Pono, they roared as they began to pick up momentum, charging the line of misshapen wildebeests they saw before them. Smashing into the shrieking mass, they hewed their way deep into the devastated and desecrated Grovelands. And even though the wildebeests were fast and strong, the peerless warriors cut through their ranks with impunity, the force of wrath adding power to their blows. All around them, they could see the remains of terrible carnage, seeing the mutilated corpses of friends and family scattered willy-nilly on their ravaged lands. Ashe felt the weight of the cloud over her land in her own soul. She was overcome with grief and a terrible despair. She could see in the faces of her warrior sisters that they, like she, were on the verge of giving in to this wave of despair. They had lost so much, and there were so many of the wildebeests facing them. Worse still, they were former colonies. They were their own people. It seemed futile to continue to resist. At that very moment, warmth tingled from her initiatory gift, the silver serpent which hung at her waist. Ashe felt a boost of renewed purpose, infusing her with strength. As she fought on, she turned and roared to her still deflated sisters, holding the serpent high, which shone with an ardent light. As she shouted, "Cobras, it falls upon us to cleanse our land. This day marks the beginning of the end of Buruku. Let us strike a death blow to this pestilence. Strike it so mightily that it shall never rear its head again. Remember, we are Kalo." And the cobras roared back and attacked with renewed vigor, and the monsters began to fall back, shrinking from the deadly rage of the Cobra clan, and especially from Ashe, who cleaved their bodies asunder with every stroke. It seemed to all that the battle was won as the monsters began to leave the field in ones and twos, then increasing numbers until a full rout was in process as the misshapen beast began to run in terror from the dripping blades of the gore-stained sisters. At that moment, the ground under their feet began to rumble, quaking so violently that many of the sisters were thrown to the ground. Suddenly, a terrible fire-breathing beast roared up from a yawning crack in the ground. Its steely scale body, equipped with sword-like claws and dagger-like fangs, it rose up as high as the treetops and then turned to face Ashe. How do you like me now, Ashe? I am your aunt, Pono. How, I said, do you like me now? Acidic saliva dripped from her aunt's rubbery lips, killing the grass and smoking where it made contact with the ground. Your time has finished, weak fool, gloated her aunt. Even now, my supernatural agents are spreading the wisdom of Buruku to all corners of the earth. See? The beast breathed a gout of flame, and within it, they could see a vision of similar destruction in all the lands of the earth. And Ashe knew it to be true, which rekindled her despair. The powerful are rising up to destroy you, sniveling weaklings, wherever and whoever you are, in every land. The last part was said in such passionate hate. The monster seemed to calm itself and then, chuckling through his yellow fangs, said, but I am so glad that you, my dear, have seen fit to present yourself to me and join your weakling mother and my sister in death. Come forward then and meet your end. And so saying, the monster swooped down, fangs clashing, as Bara, with a flew-in, rolling evasion, narrowly escaped being decapitated. The beast was supernaturally quick, arching its neck backwards and snapping a thick branch off a tree with its jaws as it narrowly missed another cobra sister. The cobras settled into a dance of evasion. Their speed and agility was such that the monster was unable to catch them. However, their swords were useless against its steely skin, and the behemoth was tireless in its pursuit of them. Eventually, the sisters tired and also began to give in to the feelings of hopelessness that the sorceress, Pono, was projecting at them. They began to feel that there really was no way to prevail against such a mighty assailant. The giant beast paused, the ground a smoking ruin where she drooled. She surveyed the fatigued sisters, knowing that they had very little left, and that their demise was a certainty. As she looked back, soldiers slumped, ready for the killing blow that would soon follow. Then once again, she felt a warmth from her waist, and reaching down, she touched the silver serpent. And as soon as she touched it, hope rose in her breast, and she opened her mouth, emitting a loud, resonant yell. That immediately re-energized the rest of the sisters so that they stood taller and faced Pono defiantly once again. The serpent once more shone with a silver halo that swept Pono's magical despair from their minds like a mighty wind, dissipating the fog as if it had never been. The sorceress of the Three Ridges was enraged by this change in their demeanor and intended to end the game immediately, reared up, her abdomen expanding like a bellows as her body twisted, talking powerfully and emitting a shrieking ball of liquid, sizzling fire that shot towards Ashe and the cobras with a horrifying speed. As the balefire raced towards them, Ashe, holding the serpentine talisman, remembered her Aunt Suna telling her that it might save her life one day. She bellowed the invocation, Inyoka! And suddenly, she and her sister cobras were standing on the green hill miles away. Whilst a wicked monster roared in frustration and confusion, unable to find them. The sisters of the cobra descended and entered the hill by way of mystical symbols known only to them and the other queen clans of Kalo. When they reached the hall by the underground river, the sites of the most secret aspects of cobra initiation, Ashe regarded them all. Sisters, the threat we face is not a natural one, nor can it be defeated by the force of arms. We must use the gift of our ancestors, for if we fail, this evil, this Buruku, will take over the whole world, and all people will become slaves to Pono's whim and the satisfaction of their own base desires. Aghast at the implications of this, Barrow asked, do we invoke the earth serpent then? Raise it from its slumber? Yes. But we have no way of knowing if it will return to sleep once it is awakened, and that will mean the end for us humans. Yes, but it will be a clean end, not the slow attrition of corruption, this pestilential contagion of Buruku, perhaps affecting even us at the end. She looked somberly at her sisters who were nodding, even Barra. The thought of becoming like Pono and the weird beast was more than enough to allay any doubts they might have had. Do we agree? Yes, they all replied in unison. So saying, the sisters started walking in a spiral pattern around the circular hall, smudging the air with incense from the burners ready in sconces on the wall. They moved with a practiced grace in intricate patterns that brought them each to sit in an inward-facing circle. And then they began to chant softly, humming the beginnings of the earth song, while Ashe poured water into a serpent-shaped groove in the center of the stone floor. And they sang, Nyoka, 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 Nyoka. And of course, I would like you to sing it with me. So the song is, Nyoka, 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 Nyoka. And please continue so that the magic can be wrought with the spell of the song Nyoka. And deep in their minds, the sisters traveled the arteries of the earth, connecting through serpent energy lines with power places in near and distant lands. Nyoka. The thrum became a roar, and each sister witnessed scenes of distant stars exploding, contracting and cooling to become planets. They saw ancient and alien lands, peopled by strange but noble folk. The creation of their own world was revealed to them in an ecstasy of sublime awareness as they danced Nyoka, 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 Nyoka in their minds, and the serpent nerve endings of their planet connected across galactic synapses with all others in the universe and universes. It was dizzying, it was inconceivable, and yet they were witnesses and they were seen, acknowledged by an awareness of such compassionate, sublime magnitude that their souls wept in gratitude. Then their awarenesses funneled into singularity as an immense serpent began to awaken at the earth's core and rise to the surface. And they were the serpents, along with Nayinka and Suna and all their mothers, stretching back back to the beginning of time. They rose and the earth turned and shifted. Craters opened, swallowing the evil perpetrators of Buruku. And though Pono, the powerful flying behemoth, strove mightily to escape, a howling whirlwind firmly clutched the shrieking monster with impunity, throwing her down to the ground, which engulfed her, despite her balefire, steel skin, and fearsome gnashing teeth. Earthquakes, screaming winds, and mighty waves roaring in from the ocean scoured the land in every corner, swallowing all of the advocates and minions of Buruku, and leaving only exhausted Cobra sisters collapsed on the stone floor in a cave. And above, the sound of the surf, the song of the land breath, and a few people who knew the value of silence. The end.
Sola. I must stop pronouncing your name in my Essex and Sola. And, that was fantastic. What is the name of the book?
It is called Nayinka's Daughter.
Can you put that in the chat, please?
Yes.
And also the publisher, because it's like when we've had Paro Anand on, and she does stories for young adults, and there are stories that are coming up here, published stories that I think should be on every high school bookshelf, and that was one. And also you should be running workshops on how to lift a story off the page and make it come alive while reading it at the same time. That was amazing. Another round of applause, please, for Sola.
Oh, thank you.
And a story for now, if there ever was. Well, after that, we take a deep breath and we cross to Cherokee Nation. And sitting there is my great friend. Normally, I meet her in the middle of fields or something, or Quiet Valley Ranch, somewhere in Kerrville or somewhere like that. But that hasn't happened for some years. And but please, can you welcome Gail Ross?
Thank you so much. I'm sorry to be late. I thought we had worked out the difference between London time and my time. So I was prepared to be here at 1, and I missed some people already. I'm really sorry.
It's not your fault, Gail. It's what happened was the clocks changed on Sunday.
Oh.
So you kind of needed to look. It was, and I was remiss. I should have warned everyone about that. I realized what happened, which is why you got a Facebook message from me.
Yes, but by that time I was on the road driving in.
Well, we're very impressed that you got here.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. It's good to see everybody again. I want to tell you a story. I'm Cherokee, and John is right. I live in the Cherokee Nation, about 17 miles north of our little town of Tahlequah, which is the capital of the Cherokee Nation. And but today I want to tell you a story that comes from my adopted brother. 40 years ago, Ron Evans and I met at a storytelling festival in Tennessee. He is Chippewa Cree Métis from Canada, and we became very close friends. And then finally, he and I adopted one another as brother and sister. And he taught me stories that come from his tradition, and I tell them only with his permission. That's the way, the tradition of his people. And so I do want to say that those are protected stories, and I tell them with his permission. And this is a story that I tell every year about this time, because it is such a beautiful, beautiful time here. I'm sure spring is probably coming where you are, John. Am I right? Well, yeah, here in the Cherokee Nation, the dogwoods are blooming, the Bradford pears, the red buds, and everything is just full of brilliant, brilliant color. And I want to tell you how that came to be. You see, the Chippewa Cree say that this world began when the youngest of the 4 creation grandmothers fell from the sky to meet her lover, the sea turtle, who rose from the depths of the ocean and caught her on his back. And they made love. And the sea turtle stayed and became this continent that we walk upon. Whenever you hear in Native poetry or Native stories, Turtle Island, that's where that comes from. Now, the youngest grandmother was sitting on his back, just, dangling her legs in the ocean, feeling good, kind of the equivalent of lighting a cigarette and saying, I hope it was good for you too. And she stayed so long that when she lifted her legs from the sea, they were covered in green moss. And the color so delighted her, she peeled the moss in strips from her legs and laid them across the sea turtle's back. And that became the grass and the trees. And with that very beginning, very, very beginning of the world, the 4 grandmothers, the young, beautiful grandmother just coming into her full womanhood, a slightly older grandmother, maybe that young grandmother's young aunt, the youngest grandmother's mother, and of course, the youngest grandmother's grandmother, though old, wise grandmother. Now, those 4 beings and their 4 male counterparts, the 4 grandfathers, they sang this world into being. With the sacred creation rattle, they sang the 4-leggeds, they sang the winged ones, they sang those that swim and those that slither and those that hop and those that crawl. And the littlest of people, the insect people. And when the world was done, and when it was beautiful, they heard a voice behind them. It said, hey, what about me? You didn't make anybody that looks like me. And that was Weetzahetza, old man. The grandparents, they say, we didn't make him. We don't know where he came from. But he was right. And so one last time, they picked up that creation rattle and they sang the 2-leggeds. We are all Weetzahetza's children, the trickster hero of the Chippewa Cree. And 4 times he took us back. He gathered up all of the people. He went to the grandparents. He threw us down and said, these people you gave me. We weren't finished, you see. We had to learn to talk, to keep him company and tell his stories. We had to learn to laugh. And we had to learn to pray. And we had to learn to dance. before we were considered fit human beings. Now, there are many stories of Huitzilopochtli wandering around the world, borrowing the creation rattle and using it, making changes in the world. But this is the story of one of the grandparents. In those very early days, excuse me, when the world was new, there was a village of people. And in this village lived a young girl. And this young girl was an artist. She loved to paint pictures. The walls of her family's lodge were covered in the pictures that she made. Now, she had to work hard to make her paints as well. You see, there wasn't much color in the world then. Colored rocks, which her brothers would grind to powder and mix with bear fat, and that made a kind of paint. And so every winter, when the snow covered the ground, the young girl would have worked as hard as she could to fill little clay pots with her paints. So snug and warm in her parents' lodge, she would paint her pictures. But long before the snow had melted, her paint pots would be empty. And she would have to wait for the snow to melt and the spring to come so she could once again make the paints, the colors that she loved. And one day in spring, it was a day when thunder spoke, lightning flashed, the wind roared, and the rains poured down in a typical spring thunderstorm. But just as the sun was setting, the clouds parted, and there against the sky was a beautiful glowing rainbow. And the little girl looked up at the rainbow and turned to her mother and said, "Oh, Mother, think of the pictures I could paint if I had those colors." And her mother, and those of us who are mothers, we know sometimes we do this. She was busy thinking about the things she needed to do, getting started on preparing an evening meal. She was only listening with maybe half of one ear, and she heard her daughter, but she said, kind of flippant, "Oh, those colors belong to the oldest of the creation grandmother. Where you see the rainbow touch the earth, that's where she pitches her lodge. Maybe someday she'll share her colors with you." Now that mother didn't mean for that young girl to pack up her paint pots in a basket and set off across the prairie on a long journey all by herself. And it was a long and difficult journey. But at last, the little girl came to the place where the rainbow touched the earth. And there, glowing in the colors of the rainbow, was a great big lodge. The little girl went up and scratched on the lodge flat. And a voice from inside said, "Come in, granddaughter." And so the little girl went in, and the grandmother said, "Why are you here? You are too small to make that journey." And the little girl told her all about the pictures that she painted, how hard it was to find colors to paint, and how she had come all that way to ask the grandmother to share the colors of the rainbow. And the oldest grandmother agreed. And so the little girl and the old woman All day long they worked, pulling all the different shades of the rainbow and filling them into the little clay pots. And when the basket was full, the little girl turned to thank the grandmother. And the old woman said, "Oh, granddaughter, that journey across the prairie, that's too long, too dangerous for one so small. I will make the rainbow touch the earth right next to your village. You climb the rainbow and go down on the other side and you will be home." And so the little girl thanked the grandmother, and with the basket on her arm, she climbed up, up, and up. It was just like walking up a very steep hill. And when she got to the top of the rainbow, she looked down and she could see that the end of the rainbow was right next to her own village. She was so happy. She thought about what her brothers would say when she told them where she had been and what she had done. She started skipping down the rainbow like a little girl will, faster and faster, and then she fell. And the basket flew off her arm, and all those paint pots flew through the air and smashed on the prairie. The little girl picked herself up. She ran as fast as she could down the rainbow out onto the prairie. She walked where every paint pot had smashed, trying to sift just a little of that color, but they were gone. The colors had sunk into the earth. And the little girl went into her lodge. And she listened to her mother scolding her for going, but so grateful that she was safe. And she went to her bed, and like a little girl will, she cried herself to sleep. But the next morning, when the little girl woke up, she heard all the voices of the people of her village. She listened. They were saying, "Look, look at this one. No, over here. Look at this one. Oh, look at that one. That's the most beautiful." She opened the lodge flap and looked out across the prairie, and it was filled with color. Everywhere a paint pot had smashed, the world's first flowers were growing. Now, in the spring, when the lightning and the thunder and the wind and the rain, when the storm blows away and you see that beautiful rainbow in the heavens, remember to thank the oldest creation, grandmother, for her gift. And when you see the flowers blooming in the spring, think of that little girl, because she was the one who brought color to our lives.
Whoa, Gail. Oh.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I love that story. I think of my brother every time I tell it.
Oh, it's been a really great night. Unfortunately, Giorgiana couldn't be with us. She's got the COVID virus. She's on her second week. She's just feeling very weak and couldn't get out of bed, but she wanted to be with us. So she will be with us another night. Ricky, I think Rika, well, I think you're off the hook. I think I think you can just relax and, you know, well, yeah, Rika up in Finland. That I kind of put her on the spot in case we ran out, in case we, you know, it was a really short program, but it's been the opposite. It's been great. Rika's trying to relax. She's just finished hanging her art exhibition. So, but it's been fantastic. It's been wonderful. So, yeah, I mean, you can unmute and talk to yourselves for a minute if you want. I hate this. It's all right. You've done your stuff. Goodbye.
Oh, I have a voice. Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you.
That was I'm sorry. I missed everybody except Sola, but I'll come back another night.
Yeah, well, you can hear it on catch up anyway.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
You go. I mean, it'll first of all be on recent performances on the homepage, and then it will just go into the archive. So, well, everything's there. So, but it's great. Been great. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Shane, are you just flicking your fingers, or do you want to say something?
No, I'm just doing that with my fingers. I'm just sort of, yeah.
Actually, the truth is, he's pretending to listen to stories, but really he's got music on in the background.
I thought he was reminding people to pay a little contribution in, maybe. I thought he said, give some money. These wonderful storytellers deserve some money.
Oh, yeah.
Could be.
Paul, I'm very sorry I missed your piece, Paul, but I'm looking forward to catching up with it on the
yeah.
In that case, whatever I collect from here, that's what I'll give you.
You did in Sola's defense. He did warn me weeks ago that he was coming at 6:30. I'd just forgotten, and so that was.
What are you like, John?
Pardon? What am I like? Well, you've known me that long, you know what I'm like, man. And, so it's been brilliant. Thank you, Gail, for that magnificent. But you messaged me earlier and wanted to know, or messaged to tell us, wanted to know what everyone else was telling. Quite by coincidence, we had 4 stories which were of women as central characters and really strong characters and creating their own destiny and so forth, which is exactly as it should be. But there's so maybe we did have an accidental theme tonight. But Paul, thank you. Sola, thank you. And Gail, thank you. It's been a brilliant night. Rika, relax.
So glad to see everybody. Take care.
Yeah.
And I'll get in touch. We'll put what we're going to have is a fantastic evening when I get it together, and when we'll have Gail and Tim Tingle on both together, which I think will be one fantastic evening. Keep an eye out for it. Keep an eye out for news on our storytelling festival in Marrakesh in February. Any tellers who want an invitation to that so they can go out and hustle for funding, I'll send a letter. Well, yeah, it's kind of, it'll work like that. You can't get big lumps, but you can get, individual tellers can get little lumps and enough to get them. We'll provide some, we'll provide some accommodation, and so but that's the most we can guarantee at the moment. But we will, but a letter of invitation, if you email me, john@johnrowe.com, but make sure you put your postal address in that, because I'll put that on the top of the letter. It makes it look more official when you're out hustling. I mean, networking.
Same difference, John. It's just a fancier hat to put out.
Yeah, it's just anyway. Yeah. Go to your local arts thing and say, and just say, we are trying to spread. It's an international, big international thing, really important for bringing the world together, etc. Give me money. It's not a holiday, honestly. But how it's working, we've got venues right through Marrakesh, the center in the Medina. So we've got our own physical storytelling center that's being built. We have the Henna Cafe, which is the social enterprise, which is a few weeks ago had given out about 20,000 free meals because Marrakesh is in real trouble because it exists by tourism and none of the cafes are open, and that's where the homeless and everyone get their meals at the end of the day. So we got Henna Cafe as a venue. We use the riads. We've got, I mean, there are riads through that connected with the cafe, the World Storytelling Cafe, including Riyadh Star, which I think it's Riyadh Star, was Josephine's baker's house in Marrakesh. You know, so there is historical stuff there. So, and we'll be doing tellings around the Riyadh. So I think it's gonna, just tell people that you just go rob a bank or something and get there. I'll send you a letter of invitation if you don't want to go in for crime. But bless you all. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you. Thank you, Paul.
Take care, people. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Lovely evening.
Thank you, Ali, as usual.